Hi everybody! So I'm finally um, doing this. It's here, it's finally happening. Um, so this is going to be my kind of intro calligraphy video. So the first thing I'm going to cover is the materials that I use. So I will start with the paper. So when you're beginning calligraphy, you definitely need to use this paper. It's good to use it anyway, even if you've been doing it for a while, because it does help you with keeping the size of your hand consistent and keeping your lines straight. Additionally, it also helps when you are creating your own hands rather than using a pre-made hand that you were copying. So the paper that I use is just a normal grid paper, which I'm sure you can't see the lines, but it's the large squares are inches, and then there are 10 lines within each inch. So using this paper is kind of essential when you're first learning, because when you're first learning, you need to know the exact height of the hand compared to the size of the nib you're using. So this is a nib. This is a 2. I generally use 3.5. It is smaller, so they range from 0, which is very, very wide, to 6, which is practically just a point. There are different types. There are beginners with round tips, so you're making consistent width of both the vertical and horizontal lines, and then once you've kind of grown accustomed to that, you do go into the normal flat nib, the square nib, which you can change the angle that you're holding the nib for the vertical and horizontal and diagonal lines to be different width depending on what hand you're using. So additionally with the nibs, there's, especially with the beginner's nibs, but it also depends on just the brand that you're using. I use Mitchell nibs just because they tend to be better quality, they tend to last longer, and they tend to just work better, in my opinion. But in some of the beginner's nibs, you actually have an attached reservoir, which is another piece of metal that just lays right across the top of this nib. And as you can see, maybe there's a little dip, there's that little hole in the nib where the ink will kind of rest. And that's how it kind of flows. The reservoir just kind of helps get more ink into the nib without having to kind of refill your nib, which is what I would do with the paintbrush, because it works better than just dipping it. That just tends to get messier. It tends to hold more ink, so when you're writing, it just blobs up on your paper. These are little tricks that kind of, once you've started using or doing calligraphy longer, you'll be able to kind of pick up and do your own style, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Second is the nib holder. Ta-da! So there are cheaper versions. This is a nice wooden one that I've been using for about 3 years now. It did cost me a pretty penny, but it's just better, and it looks like a wand, which is just an added bonus. But there are plastic ones, there are cork ones. They tend to break easier. The cork ones absorb paint if you're not careful, and then they can get hard and stiff, and they just get really crappy. Additionally, the plastic and the cork ones have the middle center, which holds your nib in place, as opposed to what I have here, which is the wood, which means that the middle part will rust on the other nib holders, and then it just gets worse from there. I also am very, very careful with this because, like I said, this did cost me a little bit more. I think buying it through the magazine, which I can't remember the name of right now, was $35. The cork and plastic ones range from like $2 to $3. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do and how frequently you'll be using your things, how long you want them to last, if you want to keep having to replace them, etc., etc. Like I said, personal preference. So it just is whatever you want to do. So next is ink, which when I say ink, I use that very broadly because I actually don't use ink. I use watercolor. It's gouache. It's Winsor & Newton, which just tends to be a better quality paint. Gouache is just a very particular type of watercolor. It tends to be opaque. It just flows better from the nib, honestly. The permanency, I mean, depending on the rating on the paint, it does tend to last longer if you use normal watercolor. That's a little too runny. If you use ink, it tends to fade in sunlight. But you know, some of these gouaches, depending on the colors, because they range from just crazy colors, but some of the more vivid colors do tend to have lower permanency rates than your standard colors. I use jet black. Because there's like coal black, soot black, normal. I don't even know. There's so many but jet black just tends to be a really, really good opaque black for anything. So what you would do, depending on the how dark you want it, how opaque you want it, you would just squirt a small portion, I think like 3/4 of an inch is about right. Add it to a container, mix a little bit of water in it, and you don't really want to shake it. You want to stir it, but this is already pre-made, so whatever. It doesn't really ruin the paint. It tends to get it a little frothier, again, depending on ratios and what kinds of paint you're using. Another thing that I'm really a fan of using as far as the writing goes, I really, really love Walnut ink. It's Paper and Ink Arts is the magazine that I use. But it's actually comes in crystal form as opposed to the gouache. And what's really, really neat about this is because it comes in this form, you can make it as light or as dark as you want. So you can make it almost as dark as the jet black, or you can make it this really light, kind of transparent, woody color. You can do whatever you want with it, and it's just so cool. I'm a big fan. I've done a lot of projects in the kind of neutral brown woody colors, and I'm really a big fan of mixing gold with my walnut ink, which just makes this really, really neat, sparkly brown color. But that, again, that's just me. I am obviously a neutral tone fan. So talk about the paper and the ink and the tools. You will need a cup or a mug of water you want to clean your nib often. If it's a new nib, make sure you stick it in your mouth, which just sounds like the strangest thing. But if it is a brand new nib, you actually want to stick it in your mouth and suck on it a little bit, because when they are first made, they're coated in an oil to help keep them shiny looking before they're bought. But that oil will affect how the ink flows out of your nib. So you want to get that oil off. I mean, you can just wash it multiple times, but it's easier. Saliva breaks down the oil a lot quicker than normal water. So put it in your mouth, swish it around, suck on it a little bit, and then clean it off. As you're writing, if you're noticing that your nib is kind of stalling with the ink, or if it's getting a little scratchy, if it's getting a little dried out, clean it out completely. Get a cloth. I mean, any cloth will work. I have my artist's cloth, and it's just dirty as shit. But it does the trick. And clean it off completely, and then just reapply the paint all over again, because it'll look better in the end. I know it's kind of a pain in the ass, but so when you're beginning, you do generally, based on the hand that you're using, like I said previously, based on the hand that you're using and the size of nib that you're using, you need to measure out how tall the hand needs to be based on the width of your nib. So if you have a wider nib, the hand needs to be taller in order to have a cleaner look. If you're using a really fat nib and a really short hand, it's just going to be squashed and almost illegible. If that's what you want to do, then go for it. But as far as legibility and how pretty it looks, you do want to measure it out. For each hand, there's generally a suggested height, and it's called the X height. So, 2.5 nib heights. So you'd use it at 90, so it'd be the most vertical. And then you would just draw the width, the absolute width of the nib across, doing, like I said, 2.5, 3, whatever it may be, nib widths for that X height, for the height of the base of your letters. So, the O would be the base. And then you have your ascenders and descenders, which again, generally have a pre-measured length that they're supposed to be. However, if you are creating your own hand, like I am right now, you can do whatever you want. Just, keeping in mind, again, legibility, whether you want your letters to be tall and thin, whether you want them to be short and fat. It's just, the world is your oyster. And so, like I said, you would measure out, and then generally you would take a straight edge and go across the length of the paper all the way down from top to bottom with those pre-measured widths or lengths or heights or whatever for your X height and then your ascender descender height. But I'm not going to do that because I'm lazy. And like I said, I'm kind of making up my own hand. I don't really know what I want to do yet. So I'm just going to be toying around and kind of seeing what happens and what I think looks best. This is actually for my friend's wedding at the end of the month. So I've got 9 days to do this, and I feel like kind of a dick for putting this off for so long. I have been practicing. I've got practice sheets here and here. I just, I haven't yet finished it. So that's what we'll be doing today. Joy. So we'll start. So I've finally, I think, gotten what I want to do as far as two hands for the projects that I'm doing for Kirshner. I do still have a letter I'm going to write for her, and I have to figure out a hand for that, but I'm going to call it good for now. All right, so there will be more eventually.